The economy of Northland is in a short-run equilibrium with an actual unemployment rate of 7% and an actual inflation rate of 1%. The natural unemployment rate of Northland is 5%. Using the numerals, we will draw a label graph of the unemployment rate of 7% and the inflation rate of 1%. The graph is the short run and long run Phillips curve. And we will label the short run equilibrium point as X. Here Katie is drawing the long run Phillips curve at 5%, which is the natural rate of unemployment. We will then draw the short run Phillips curve at 7% unemployment rate, but at a 1% of inflation rate, and we will mark that as X. Question B asks, is the expected inflation rate greater than, less than, or equal to 1%? And we will explain. The expected inflation rate is greater than 1% because the economy is in a recession, and that means that unemployment is higher than the natural rate of unemployment. Since the marginal propensity to consume is 0.9, if the government decreases income taxes by 20 billion, we need to calculate the maximum change in aggregate demand. And we will do this by putting negative 0.9 on top of 0.9 minus 1 times negative 20 billion. And that would equal to 180 billion. If the government increases spending by 20 billion and the maximum change of aggregate demand, we're going to times 20 billion by 1 over 0.9 minus 1, and that would equal to 200 billion, as Katie shows here. On our graph in part A, we will show the possible new short-run equilibrium labeled as point Z that would result from the government increasing spending and there being no change to inflationary expectations. So on our graph, we will put Z on close to the line, but not exactly on it. How would the unemployment affect aggregate demand in the short run? It would increase aggregate demand in the short run because of disposable income increasing and consumption spending increasing in aggregate demand. For our last one, the government takes none of the preceding policy action, and northern land is still in the short run. So we're going to see the short run aggregate supply curve and explain, and the short run Phillips curve. So for FI, the short run aggregate supply curve would increase because people accept lower wages because of the recession. This causes lower input costs and an increase in the short run aggregate supply. On I, we will see what will happen to the short run Phillips curve in the long run. In the long run, it will shift to the left. the unemployment rate would end up shifting to the left. For our next one, we are seeing the United States and South Africa as trading partners, and we're going to be doing the current balance with South Africa as zero. So, assume the real income of the United States increases while the real income of South Africa remains the same. Will the United States exports increase, decrease, or remain the same? Explain. The U.S. net exports will decrease because the increase in real income will cause exports to increase, which will decrease net exports. Based on our answer in part A, we will see what will happen to the account balance for the capital and financial in the United States and actual unemployment in South Africa in the short run. The account balance for the capital and financial will be more of a surplus. Will move into a surplus. So what will happen to actual unemployment in South Africa in the short run? The employment will ultimately decrease in the short run because increased exports lead to an increased real GDP and aggregate demand. For Part C, the currency in the United States dollar and the currency in South Africa is the rand. So we have to draw a correctly labeled graph of the foreign exchange market and show the effects of an increase in real income in the United States on the international value. So we will start by drawing our graph. Let us focus. Okay, we'll start by drawing our graph, and on the bottom, since we are doing of the ZAR, we'll do quantity of ZAR, and on the top, we'll have the US dollar over the ZAR. Next, we're going to draw our aggregate supply and demand. Not aggregate. Our supply and our demand with the equilibrium being Q1 and the P1. And the demand will move to the right. Okay, assume that the economy of countries is in a long-run macroeconomic equilibrium. We're going to draw a graph of the aggregate demand, short-run aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply curves to show the following. Price level labeled as Y1 and PL1, and the full employment of Y1. Now, this marker was a little bit wonky, so just bear with me right here, and then we'll get started. So we're going to name the y-axis PL and the x-axis GDPR because we're looking for the aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply. So this long line in the middle will be the long-run aggregate supply, which will be our equilibrium, as you can see to me pointing straight. And our aggregate demand will be going down. And our aggregate supply will be going, the short run aggregate supply, will be going up. Next, we will label our equilibrium, and mine isn't completely in the middle, but we're going to pretend it's in the middle. So we're going to label that Y1 because that is what we're at, because that is our real output of price level and real GDPR, GDRP, and that's labeled PL1, and then the bottom is going to be labeled Y1. Next, we're going to show on our graph the full employment, and because we are already the Y employment, it would be equal to the full employment because it did not say it was leaning anywhere else. Okay, and now we're going to be showing a shift. On our graph, we will show the short-run effects of an increase in customer confidence. And an increase in customer confidence would mean an increase in demand. So this would shift our aggregate demand to the right, increasing our price level and GDPR. Assume that the banking system in Zen has ample reserves. Suppose that the central bank's goal is to maintain a stable price level at PL1. Based on the change in price level shown in Part B, identify one specific monetary policy action a central bank would take to achieve its goal. So, ample reserves mean that there's not a limit on them, so that the central bank could do an increase on interest on reserves. I don't know why I didn't show it. Might have deleted. But based on the monetary policy identified in Part C, will the real output increase, decrease, or stay the same in the short run? The real output would ultimately decrease of consumption going down, causing a decrease in aggregate demand.